Hey again, everybody. It's Guardian Enzo coming to you from frigid Kobe, Japan. And welcome to the Lost in Anime YouTube channel. And today I wanted to do what I'm calling the Holiday Sampler Manga Recommendation Corner. And I think what I'm going to do today is I thought it would be fun to talk about a few manga that you haven't heard me discuss before, either on my website or on the podcast. And just a couple minutes on each one, some quick hitters. I have a 10 pack for you today. Various manga that I've been reading and enjoying or have recently finished. Some of them quite well known, some of them probably a little more obscure, and some of them even licensed. It's always a treat when I can talk about licensed manga. There are so many great properties that have not been licensed, especially in English. A lot more seemingly have been licensed in France, where they have a tremendous comic culture and have been big time manga consumers for longer than Americans have been big time manga consumers. So they seem to get a lot of licenses before America does. Well, we're starting to catch up on the English language side. So, again, a 10 pack holiday sampler and a happy Festivus to everyone. And I'm going to start out with what I would not call a feel good holiday title, and that's Oyasumi Punpun by Asano Inio. And certainly, this manga is no secret to a lot of listeners out there. It's very well known, but nevertheless, it's not one I've talked about. And I certainly wanted to make it clear that yes, I too consider this manga a masterpiece, one of the greatest seinen manga of the modern era. Very, very difficult read at times. It's a manga that I call the opposite of extremism. It's really immersion. It immerses you so much in the angst of existence that you feel like you're drowning in it. But if that experience is something that you want, then I think Oyasumi Punpun is an incredibly perceptive and an incredibly deep series. Very disturbing. It's the story of he starts out. I think we meet him in about fifth or sixth grade. A boy named Onodera Punpun, and follows him through several years of his life. Asano is a fascinating writer. He's done many manga, some of which have been licensed. Like Solanine was quite successful in English, but I consider Oyasumi Punpun, which they call Goodnight Punpun in English, which is a quite literal translation, to be his masterwork. He does some fascinating things visually here. The style changes quite a bit over the course of the manga. He depicts the main character and his family as sort of Punpun, especially as a sort of a waif-like bird figure. But his appearance changes over the course of the series. There's a direct connection between what the main character is feeling and what we're seeing depicted in the visual style. It's really a fascinating and strange and powerful and moving and sad piece of work. But I recommend it. I think there's a reason that Goodnight Punpun is considered to be a sign-in masterpiece and one of the greatest manga of our time. So I highly recommend it to everyone. Again, fully licensed in English, all published, so you have that option to go. Will it ever see an anime? I would say probably not, simply because I think anime is a little scared of Oyasumi Punpun. It's so dark and so strange and so intentionally ugly at times that I think you'd have a really hard time getting a production committee to sign off on it. And it's a series that I think really needs, if it was ever to be adapted, it would need to be adapted unadulterated, unfiltered. And I think that would be a hard sell. Nevertheless, highly worth it in manga form and one I strongly recommend. Next series on our list is, I would say, less well known, and that's Tengoku Daimakyou, which is also licensed in English. I think there's about 5 volumes out, maybe not quite that many. It's called Heavenly Delusion in English and licensed in French as A Journey Beyond Heaven. And this is by Ishiguro Masakazu, who may be known to anime fans because he is the person who wrote Sori de Momachi wa Mawate Iru, which is a series that I quite liked in anime form, even though it was a Shaft anime. And there haven't been a lot of Shaft anime I've liked over the years. This was one I really, really did. And that got me into the manga. Tengoku Daimakyou is another of these dystopian future series like YKK, which I talked about in a video a couple weeks ago. The dystopia in Tengoku is much more immediate. It feels much more connected to our current present than the one in YKK does. This can be quite a dark series. It has a fair amount of violence, and it's quite graphic sexually at times, but it never feels anything other than organic to the story. It's just this is the world that these people are living in. Again, this is a sign in as well. It's a story mostly of a boy named Maru, who's a tow-headed 15-year-old who has interesting abilities, quite bright, but a bit of a dunderhead at times as well. And he's traveling the country, searching for a place called Heaven with an older girl named Kiriko, and there's some past involved with her, which we won't get into because we don't do spoilers on Enzo Loves Manga, but nevertheless, those two are a pair, and then there's another setting which is a kind of a strange school where all kinds of unusual things happen to a bunch of younger children, some of whom look quite familiar. It's a very interesting series, very thought provoking, quite dark, but also often quite funny. And it has a lot of the same sort of a vibe that Sorry Demo has, although it's a much darker and much more violent series. So that's Tengoku Daimakyo by Ishiguro Masakazu, another one that I strongly recommend you check out. Next up on the list, we're going to go with another licensed series. This one is Hokuhokusei ni Kumo to Ike, which is licensed again in English and French. And this one in English is called Follow the Clouds North by Northwest. And I think 5 volumes on this one as well. This is an ongoing series, as is Daimakyo. And this one is by Irie Aki, who was a mangaka I had not been really much familiar with before I started reading North by Northwest. But this is an interesting series. Again, it's a sign in. That's 3 for 3 on sign in. Maybe not a total coincidence. It's a story of a 17-year-old Japanese kid named Miyama Kei who is living in Iceland and working as a detective. And it's that's an odd sort of premise to begin with. And I've seen it compared to Kino no Tabi, and I could sort of see that in a way. There is a sort of a going from place to place in a lonely landscape and meeting interesting people, sort of a quality to it. But it's quite different it's much more connected to the real world than Kino no Tabe is. But it is if you like that, I think you might find a similar vibe here. It's a beautiful artwork in this series. It's really really lovely. I haven't read that many chapters of this, but I really really have gotten quite swept up in it quickly, which is always a good sign. This is a series that's gotten a fair bit of recommendation. It's actually getting bundled into a new publication that's just like starting up in Japan later this or early next year. That's also going to include uh, Mori Kaoru's Bride Story, Otoyome Gitari. So all kinds of interesting things are going to be in that. I think this is a good one. Could get an anime someday, maybe, but we'll see. Definitely thoughtful, definitely wistful. Not a high-paced action series, but really really beautiful to look at and quite brilliant intellectually as well. Hokuhokusei ni Kumo to Ike, Follow the Clouds North by Northwest. Next up on the list, we have a finished series, which again I don't think is going to be a secret to a lot of people, probably fairly well known, but it's called Kokou no Hito, which is translates roughly to the climber, which unfortunately has not been licensed in English, and I don't think even in French. This one is by an author called Sakamoto Shinichi, and it's actually based on a novel, loosely based on a novel, which was loosely based on the life of a real Japanese mountain climber from about the 1920s, I believe. And it is a story of a climber It's the story of a man named Mori Buntaro, and starts out when he's a senior in high school and kind of goes from there. He's a kind of a loner, an angry young man, and he finds solace in rock climbing and mountain climbing and other sorts of climbing as well. It's very bright. This is a really this it's another sign in 444. This one was published, I think, in Young Jump when it was originally published in Japan. It finished quite a few years ago, so again, it's not going to be a secret to anybody like Oyasumi Punpun isn't. But if you don't know this series or if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth it. It almost feels to me like a series that could have been written by Takehiko Inoue, Vagabond and Slam Dunk fame. There's a slight similarity to the visual style and something of a gritty realism to the writing style as well. The art is not quite as stunningly beautiful as Takehiko's is, but that's a high bar. There's very few that are. So, Kokou no Hito, the climber, you don't have to be interested in mountain climbing, which I sort of am, but you don't have to be interested in that to get into this series because it's really mostly a psychological story about loneliness and anger, and it's really pretty special. And I think it's one of those series again. Once you read the first chapter, you're going to realize there's something special going on with this one. Okay, next up we have Kimi wa Hokago Insomnia, Insomniacs After School, another unlicensed series, unfortunately. This one by the author Ojiro Makoto. And another sign in. We're perfect 5 for 5. Oh, we definitely have a trend going on here. This one was actually recommended me by one of my kind followers on lostinanime.com, my website. And another one of those series that you sort of immediately get into with the first chapter. It immediately grabs you. Relatively new series, only been out for about 18 months, I think, in Japan. Published in Big Comic Spirits, I think. Story about a boy, first year high school kid who has insomnia, absolutely terrible insomnia, can't sleep at night, is generally regarded as a loner and a surly, unlikable kid in school because he's exhausted all the time. And he happens to stumble on the former club room of the astronomy club, which is rumored to be haunted. And there's a girl there named Magari Isaki who he discovers Nakami discovers that Magari is also an insomniac, and she's been using the club room as a place to sleep during the day as her retreat. And there's it's this is a it actually reminds me a little bit of Sorry Demo now that I mentioned it. There's sort of that same kind of uh, an appreciation for the mystical nature of nighttime and the dark side of society, but not in a really depressing way so much. It's more just kids dealing with their own issues and finding comfort in finding someone like them. And I think again, this is one that again, I'm not deep into this. I've only read several chapters, but it's one of those series that really grabs you immediately as soon as you start reading it. And again, there's a loneliness factor here, but I think the insomnia factor too. If you're an insomniac, and I have wrestled with that at times, not as severely as the main characters in this series do, but I have wrestled with it. If you know what that feels like, it seems pretty clear to me that the mangaka has dealt with insomnia because it's written in a way that suggests authoritativeness that I don't think would be possible if that weren't the case. A really good series, funny, moving, a little bit snarky and ironic at times, but in a good way. Kimi wa Hokago Insomnia, Insomniacs After School. Unlicensed, unfortunately, but well worth your time, I think. That's a really good one. Next up, we have another unlicensed series, sadly, and this one is another sign in. We're still going perfectly. This one is called Shounen no Ato, uh, which is also known in English, literally translated as A Boy's Scar. And the author on this one is Inaba Hachi, who was not a manga that I was aware of before because this is the first series that she's ever written. As far as I know, I've never seen any indication that she's written anything previously, assuming it is a she, and I think with that name it probably is. And Shonen no Ato is a story about a woman named Suzuka who ends up more or less informally adopting a boy about 9 years old named Fusuke. And they're in a somewhere, I'm assuming Hokkaido. It's certainly a very, very snowy small town or village somewhere in the north of Japan, or at least in a mountainous area of Japan. And they're both people, the woman and the boy, who have lost something very, very precious to them. And she doesn't like kids generally, and he doesn't seem to like anyone, but they are connected by fate. And there's another factor that goes into this that I won't spoil that sets it off quite distinctly from what you would call a traditional story. There's definitely an element that goes beyond that into the, I would say, the supernatural side, which becomes apparent pretty quickly as you read it. So I'm not spilling any beans there. This is another fairly young series, I think only about 3 volumes in Japan. Mag Garden, which is often a great source for manga, online manga. And I really enjoy the Shonen no Ato a lot. I really like the relationship between Suzuka and Fusuke. I think it's quite engaging. It's quite unvarnished. They don't. It's not huggy sweetie. It's definitely a rough go between the two of them. They're abrasive in their own way. But again, I think it's a good story about how lonely people can find solace in other lonely people. And it is a beautiful artwork on this. I love the character designs. I love the facial, the representations, the facial expressions and stuff. It's really quite a lovely series. Shonen no Ato, A Boy's Scar. Next up, another really, really beautiful series, licensed in France but not yet in the States. This one is called MagMell Shinkai Suizokukan. MagMell Shinkai Suizokukan. Deep Sea Aquarium MagMell. There was another MagMell anime or a MagMell manga that got an anime about a year or two ago. Do not confuse it with this. Completely different series. Another sign in. We're still perfect there. We've got a perfect. I did not intend this to be a sign in show, but so far it is. Sugishita Kiyomi is the mangaka here. Again, first series, so no track record there. This is one that I drew attracted to just by seeing beautiful, beautiful covers, walking past it at the bookstore and thinking, wow, I would really like to read this series. These covers are fantastically beautiful. And but it was never translated. It's a sign in, so even if you read the raws, there's no furigana to speak of, so it's a tough go if you don't read Japanese fluently. Eventually, we did start to see translations on this. I'm hopeful it will get an English language license at some point. I think it is a sort of title that would do very well. Already licensed in French, as I said. Story about a young man named Minato, who is absolutely obsessed with fish, with aquariums. There's a rather futuristic deep sea aquarium. It's actually an aquarium that was constructed under the ocean or in the ocean, under the ocean surface. And he's dreamed of working there his whole life. And eventually he does start working there as a janitor. And it's mostly series about the love of nature and the love of the sea, and just the general just bathing in the beautiful, beautiful artwork. I think the artwork in this series is some of the most beautiful I've seen in any series in a long time. Again, a relatively new series, about 3 years old in Japan. I think about maybe 6 volumes or so in Japan, something like that at this point. Just, I think so far I don't see a lot of deep psychological themes or anything here. It's really just a slice of life science series that has incredibly beautiful artwork and depictions of the ocean and ocean life that are on a par with Children of the Sea, I would say, on that level. That's how beautiful the artwork is here. So, MagMell Shinkai Suizokukan Deep Sea Aquarium MagMell. If you're French, you're lucky you have a licensed version of this. In English, unfortunately, not yet. Next up is Tonari no Furi-san ga Tonikaku Kowai. It's yes, it's Tonikaku Kowai, but it's a slightly different series than the other Tonikaku Kawai. Here, the Kowai is Kowai, which means scary rather than cute. And the English translation of that is something like, "No matter what you say, Furi-san is scary." Again, no license on this one yet, unfortunately. We can only hope. This one is a shonen, so we break out of our sign and spell here. This one is by an author named Kinoe Seiichi, who wrote one other series, but I don't think received a long serialization, so relatively new. Tonari no Furisan is about a first year high school student named Namito Taira, who gets seated next to the Yankee girl. And the Yankee, for those who don't know, is rather than meaning an American per se, it generally refers to, in Japanese school terms, any delinquent. And her name is Furi-yoko. And naturally, as unsurprisingly, he gets to know her. They get seated next to each other in homeroom, and he is scared of her, as everyone else is. But Furi-san turns out to be a very different person than he thinks she is, and they both have a certain interest in otaku pursuits, especially Taira. Uh, this is just a fun. I don't know if I'd call it a rom com. It's definitely a comedy, a school life series. Tyra is a nice kid, a really charmingly nice, normal protagonist. Furi Yoko is she's just a quirky, odd, abrasive person who has a sweet side to her, and their relationship is fun. And it isn't entirely an original concept, but the execution is what carries the day here. And I find it a really just a nice escape. It's about 2 years old, the series, so again, maybe 4 volumes in Japan. Will it ever get licensed? Who knows? But this is a sort of series that I think could eventually see an anime someday. It has the right sort of vibe to it to get an anime. And you get into a little bit of a widening orbit with the manga club gets involved. So, there's some other characters involved here, like the manga club senpai, but mainly it's Namito and Yoko, the titular furry-san, and her seatmate Taira. So, a really fun series, really sweet, very funny. Uh, definitely not deep. Definitely not dark and daring, but a nice escapist school life comedy with some romance to it. Tonari no Furi-san ga Tonikaku Kowai. No matter what you say, Furi-san is scary. Into the home stretch, a series called Uchi no Musuko wa Tabun Gay. I think our son is gay. This one is licensed in English, although it won't start publishing until next year. Square Enix has licensed it. And this is a good one. It's a subject you don't see manga handle with sensitivity too often, so I always like to call it out when I see it. The main character here is a boy named Daigo, who's a first year high school student. He has a younger brother named Yuri, and the other main character here is the mom, who is the one who's saying, "I think our son is gay." And effectively, that is the story: is Daigo is gay and tries to hide it from his family, but does a terrible job of it. And Yuri and mom both basically know. And he's the younger brother. He's in eighth grade, and he's rather mystified by romance generally, but he's quite smart and interesting observational character. Mom is, I mean, if you were a gay teenager, I don't have that experience, but if you were, I think this is a mom that any gay teenager would have wanted to have. And some would say maybe unrealistic series, but I have to say because of that, but I have to say that in real life there are some parents who are incredibly understanding and incredibly kind in this situation. So I don't think it's unrealistic to see one of them depicted in a series like this. And there's a father here too, and we don't see too much of him, but he turns up from time to time. As far as we know, clueless about the situation with Daigo, although mom is absolutely anything but clueless about it, which is really the driver behind the series. Interestingly, the author himself, the mangaka, just came out fairly recently, although I can't think it would have been a huge surprise because it's a very personal feel, this series. But And that's so read the author's notes on this if you read it, because he tells some interesting stories about his own life. Uh, just a nice, heartwarming story about tolerance in a society here that's not always known for tolerance in this area, and again, a depiction of the realities of being a gay teenager that's treated with respect and treated with some dignity, which I always like to see in manga, don't always see. So I wanted to call that out. It's a very entertaining series. Uchi no Musuko wa Tabun gay. I think our son is gay. And the last series I want to talk about today is a series called Himeno-chan ni Kowai wa Mada Hayai. In English, something like Love is Still Too Early for Himeno-chan. And the boom element in manga right now is junior high school romantic comedy, but this is actually an elementary school romantic comedy. And the author's name is Yuzu Chiri here. Uh, Written quite a few series. This is a web manga, an increasingly important segment of the manga market in Japan. I really like this one a lot. It's appropriate to the age group. Again, these are elementary school kids, so it's a romance in strictly in an innocent sense. The character named Himeno-chan, who is the title character, she has a major crush on her classmate Oji-kun, who is mostly clueless about it in a way that boys his age should be. But it's she's precocious and in over her head at the same time, which is a lot of the charm of the series. And they each have older siblings who get involved in it, and their circle of friends is very funny. It's just a really it's a fun it's a fun mostly comic. It's a rom com with the focus on the com, given the age group that's appropriate, but an enjoyable read and really, really, really cute. And if you want to read an elementary school romantic comedy, Love is Too Early for Himeno-chan would be a good choice. Unfortunately, again, not licensed, but well worth seeking out, I would say. So that's a 10-pack holiday sampler for you. Some manga we haven't talked about here before. I hope you'll go out and give some of them a chance. I hope you'll support the authors where you can by buying the licensed versions of them. And as you know, as I've made very clear, I think manga is in a great place right now. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and I really love talking about it. And it just seemed like a good opportunity as we headed into the holiday break to talk about some series that can help to fill your time over the holiday season. A lot of us are still stuck inside a lot more than we would like to be too. So I've been reading a lot of manga this year, as I'm sure a lot of you have as well. Thank you very much again. Thank you for tuning in on the lostinanime.com YouTube channel. Of course, as always, if you like what you see, please subscribe, please like. Any feedback in the comments would be most sincerely appreciated. And I look forward to a great year. We have some end of the year surprises coming up on the website and over here on YouTube, and I hope you'll stay tuned for those. And looking forward to a great 2021. I'll talk to you soon. Stay frosty.